Real quick introduction to Boyd Book Club this week. We are actually doing a two-part special on Chapter 4. And this week we are going to do Part 1 of Chapter 4, and we are principally going to talk about the postmodern project of Boyd. Next week we are going to principally talk about chaos, complexity, and complex adaptive structures. Welcome back to Boyd Book Club. Today we are taking up Chapter 4 in Osinga's Science, Strategy, and War, Completing the Shift. In this chapter, Osinga sets out to finish looking at how the scientific thinking of the day, the zeitgeist, influences Boyd and leads his thinking to where it does. Because understanding this shift in thinking, understanding this philosophical approach is really critical to getting at the power that lies in Boyd's thought as it's developed over time. So we're going to look at chaos and complexity theory. We're going to look at this notion of complex adaptive systems. But first and foremost, we are going to look at how Boyd fits into what is known as the postmodern era. I think it's important to start with postmodernism because it's a topic that freaks a lot of people out. At the end of the day, postmodernism is a often vilified, mostly misunderstood concept in the modern language of human thinking. And I think it's important that we start by examining postmodernism, talking about what it is, addressing some of the basic concerns about it, and setting the stage for how the postmodern thought plays into Boyd's thinking. So, what is postmodernism? Literally, it is the period after the modernist period. So, we need to take a step backwards. What then is modernism? Modernism is a evolutionary change in thinking and structure that promises notions of certainty, of predictability, and the capacity to have pure knowledge. What are some examples of this? Some examples of the modern project would be Newton's theories and Darwin's theories. And Newton's theories and Darwin's theories are useful. They are important. They are incredibly helpful if we apply them at the proper scale, if we apply them in the proper setting. However, postmodernism picks up on the idea that Newtonian mechanics are a certain thing, that Darwin's theories lead to predictable outcomes, and says, no, this isn't true. Postmodernism is a rejection of these structures and an openness to fluidity in describing systems, societies, and concepts. As we consider Osinga's notion of Boyd as a postmodernist, we want to define postmodernism. We want to understand it and have a common language for it. Pulling from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a phenomenal resource for anybody looking to understand concepts of philosophy, postmodernism, quote, can be described as a set of critical, strategic, and rhetorical practices employing concepts such as difference, repetition, the trace, the simulacrum, and hyperreality to destabilize other concepts such as presence, identity, historical progress, epistemic certainty, and the univocity of meaning. There is a lot going on in that sentence, so I want to break it down a little bit, and then we're going to address sort of a common criticism of postmodernism. So, to begin, let's break down how do we describe postmodernism. Strategic and rhetorical practices that destabilize other concepts. So postmodernism is principally a method of critique. It grows out of the post-structuralist, deconstructionalist world of literary criticism. It grows out of the world of linguistics and notions of hermeneutics and how we understand things by virtue of the language we use and the implicit assumptions we make about what words mean. And it is a process rather than a movement. If we understand postmodernism as a process, it is incredibly useful. If we use it simply as a foil to explain away our drive for certainty, our desire for certainty, then it falls apart. So this postmodern project, the strategic and rhetorical practice of destabilizing concepts, particularly in Boyd's world as they apply to epistemic certainty and the univocity of meaning, become critical. When we say the univocity of meaning, what are we talking about? We are talking about the idea that all words, all concepts have a single meaning, that they are universally understood. The fact of the matter is, all we have to do is talk about the word love, and we can know that words do not have universal meaning. The word love in the English language can be defined in many different ways, and my experience of love and your experience of love very likely have shared but also different concepts. Difference becomes important in understanding our rhetorical project. Epistemic certainty is also something that postmodernism rejects. And what we mean by epistemic certainty is 100% perfect knowledge. We do not possess perfect knowledge. This is something Boyd comes back to again and again in his lectures. We as human beings do not have perfect knowledge because we cannot comprehend nor take in all of the information necessary to have perfect knowledge. If we look at the postmodern project just through this lens, this definition of a set of practices that examine difference and try to reject epistemic certainty and the univocity of meaning, we can see already where Boyd is coming from. Now, let's talk about some of the criticisms of the postmodern project. There are many, some of them are very useful, but let's talk about the common and wrong rejection of postmodernism that we see here in the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. The test question: what important event took place on December 16th, 1773? Calvin's answer: I do not believe in linear time. There is no past and future. All is one, and existence in the temporal sense is illusory. This question, therefore, is meaningless and impossible to answer. This right here, when in doubt, deny all the terms and definitions, is the most common critique of postmodernism we hear from people who do not want to actually look at postmodernism, in my opinion. Postmodernism is not a solipsism. It is not solipsic nihilism. Postmodernism is the notion that epistemic certainty and univocity of meaning ought to be rejected because they are untenable positions to hold. It does not, however, reject objective fact. It does not reject that there is actionable information in the world that we can make use of. What it does reject is the idea that we can possess 100% true understanding of the meaning of all of those things. This is an important distinction, and it's one that gets blurry because it's hard, because it requires sitting back and critically thinking and critically examining what we believe and why we believe it. Asking, is that so? And if it is so, does it matter? It requires us to challenge our heuristics and biases, which, though helpful, may impede our path to a fuller, more comprehensive understanding. Orientation, then, in Boyd's lexicon, is in fact a postmodernist system. It is a recognition that knowledge and meaning are constituted through the networked nature of individuals, through interpretive communities. This is Osinga's language, but look at orientation. What does orientation come back to? It comes back to genetic heritage. It comes back to cultural traditions. It comes back to previous experiences. These three elements are all things that are based upon our communal nature as networked individuals. This becomes critically important information, and this overall project of taking all of these things, critically examining them, not only individually, but against one another in a self-referential way through analysis and synthesis, is a postmodernist project. So, as we read chapter 4 and we look into chaos, complexity, and complex adaptive systems, what we want to recognize is that Boyd, as the postmodernist, is offering us an organizationally closed but structurally open system. How so? Our orientation is in part a fixed system. It is organizationally closed. It is rooted in a set of structures that Boyd has identified and that he believes are part of how we interact with ourselves and the world around us. While it is organizationally closed, it is structurally open because of unfolding circumstances, outside information, and our interaction with the environment. This is a description of a living, open, dissipative system. It is chaotic. It is non-deterministic in many respects, but it is a living system. I really think there's value in reading and rereading chapter 4 because the notions of chaos and complexity are complicated. They're complex. They are very deep subject matters that can't be addressed quickly or simply. We can assume, for the time being, that Boyd has done his research and that the researchers around him, the researchers that he is basing his knowledge on, have done their research, and that there is validity to their point of view. That is where we can begin as we dissect Boyd. However, we have to recognize in Boyd as a postmodernist that the mere acceptance of that information as certain runs contrary to the dissipative open system and in fact promotes entropic thinking. I could probably spend 4 hours trying to break that sentence down. I'm not going to, because I think it's something you need to reflect upon. And I don't use that as a cop-out. I use it as a very real reference point that this cannot simply be explained to you or offered up to you. And that's why I suggest that looking at Boyd's thinking through that postmodernist lens that Osinga suggests is a very important one. We have to reject epistemic certainty. We must question meaning, Boyd's meaning, Osinga's meaning, my meaning, how you mean things when you're approaching them. You have to look at this material yourself in depth and in understanding. It cannot simply be handed to you. You need to be structurally open to the material. I believe this is going to be part 1 of discussing chapter 4, because I think there's a lot of information here that we need to go through. I think we need to break down chaos and complexity and complex adaptive structures in much more detail. But I think doing that and also trying to tackle the postmodernist project in one fell swoop may be too much. So we're going to end here with the idea that, as Osinga says, Boyd may be considered the first strategist to incorporate the paradigm shift in science of the 20th century into strategic theory, deliberately and normatively, and to construct a theory based on the insights that paradigm shift spawned. Boyd's project is a normative project. It is a project that seeks to describe how we ought to do things, how we ought to think, how we ought to engage in strategy, but it is also a descriptive process. I see the OODA loop as having both descriptive and normative value, and in that way, it is a powerful tool. We're going to stop here with part 1 of chapter 4 and discussing the postmodern aspects of Boyd. And we're going to pick up next week with part 2 of chapter 4 and truly delve into the chaos and complexity theory that is at the core of moving forward with Boyd's thinking. As always, thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for participating in Boyd Book Club and the ongoing conversations. These lectures are made possible by the support of our Patreon supporters. I thank all of you for jumping in and helping out with that cause. Please like, share, subscribe. Let people know what we're doing. Share the Instagram stuff. Share the Facebook stuff. Get people involved in this conversation. As it continues to evolve and unfold, I think that the more people that are participating, the more we can synthesize a grander understanding of how to apply Boyd's thinking in all of our lives. I'll see you soon. Cheers.